The Foreign Office transmitted the Prime Minister's memorandum to Johnston by cable at 3:45 p.m. on 12 September 1889. They also appended an annotation to the cable stating, "Your action with regard to Jaja approved. Further instruction will be sent after communication with Admiralty." The purpose of this cable was to tell Johnston to await further instruction without taking any action regarding Jaja. On the same day, Johnston sent a cable to the Foreign Office stating, "Ask immediate permission, remove Jaja temporarily, Gold Coast. Organize armed attacks, obstructs waterways, markets. Intrigues render this course imperative." Dispatch following explains, "Ask Admiralty telegraph assistance." The official account by Johnston and the Foreign Office is that, by some incredible coincidence, Johnston's cable arrived at the Foreign Office at 3:55 p.m. the same day, only 10 minutes after the Foreign Office sent a cable telling him to stand by for further instructions. According to this traditional explanation, because the two cables allegedly crossed in transmission, Johnston misinterpreted the words, "Your action with regard to Jaja approved," in the Foreign Office cable as approval of his request to deport Jaja. However, the Foreign Office was replying to his earlier unrelated 19th August cable, not to his request to deport Jaja. It is not possible to verify or disprove Johnston and the Foreign Office account, since in those days, telegrams were not sequentially numbered to clarify the order in which they were sent and received. However, even if the official account is accepted, there are still some puzzling features. The next day, the Prime Minister sent another memorandum to the Foreign Office telling them to adhere to my instructions already given and execute them. Consul's language and proposal do not inspire me with confidence. Naval officer will be less under the influence of merchants. That same day, a delegation from Opobo, including two of Jaja's sons who had been sent to Britain, met with the Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Sir James Ferguson, to present a petition on Jaja's behalf. Yet for some strange reason, the officials at the Foreign Office, several of whom had been fed on a diet of Hewitt's and Johnston's incendiary reports about Jaja, did not execute the Prime Minister's twice-cabled instructions. Also, they oddly did not send another clarifying cable to Johnston in order to clear up the potential misunderstanding caused by two unrelated cables arriving almost simultaneously. Johnston immediately acted upon the part of the cable that stated, "Your action with regard to Jaja approved," but strangely ignored the other parts of the cable that told him to wait for the instructions, as well as the Prime Minister's memorandum, which clearly deferred any action on Jaja until a naval investigation had been completed. It was also odd that he presumed that a cable that referred to his action as approved of something he was asking for permission to do in the future. Back at Opobo, the impetuous Johnston was still at work. Armed with what he thought was authorization to deal with the situation, he again invited Jaja to a meeting on 19 September 1887 at the Opobo premises of the British trading firm Thomas Harrison and Company, a competitor of Jaja's that had been campaigning for his removal. Jaja was unaware of events in England, but nonetheless the meeting request aroused his suspicion. He replied to Johnston, "I am quite sensible of your position and your capability of doing me any harm. Therefore, I am afraid to come." Jaja asked Johnston to prove that you mean no harm against me by sending a British hostage to be placed in his house as a surety for his safe return. Johnston refused to agree to this condition, but in his words advised Jaja strongly and in his own interest to attend the meeting. Jaja then said he would attend only if Johnston gave him an assurance that he would not be arrested and that he would be free to leave when the meeting concluded. Johnston wrote a letter to Jaja on 18 September 1887 to reassure him. "I have summoned you to attend in a friendly spirit. I hereby assure you that whether you accept or reject my proposal tomorrow, no restraint whatever will be put upon you. You will be free to go as soon as you have heard the message of the government. If you do not attend the meeting, no further consideration will be shown you, and you will be simply treated as an enemy of the British government. I shall proclaim your disposition and hand your markets over to the Bonny men. If you attend tomorrow, I pledge you my word that you'll be free to come and go. Based upon Johnston's assurance of safe passage and that he would not be detained, Jaja agreed to attend the meeting. When he arrived on the morning of Monday, 19 September, he was confronted by Johnston's British naval officers and the British gunboat HMS Goshak, which had pointed its guns at Opobo. Johnston had also conscripted armed men from the Bonny to blockade the creeks around Opobo to prevent Jaja from escaping. Johnston read out aloud an ultimatum to Jaja. Should you be so misguided as to refuse to submit to the orders of the British government, it will be taken as an admission that you are guilty of the charges brought against you. I shall then proceed to use an armed force which will mercilessly crush any resistance you may offer. You will be deposed and tried for your misdeeds as a common malefactor. Your property will be confiscated and your country brought to ruin by the stoppage of trade. Should you attempt to evade me by escaping into the interior, you will be declared an outlaw. A reward will be offered for your capture, which will be sufficiently large to tempt the greed of your treacherous followers, and your bitter enemies among the surrounding tribes will be free to avenge you on old grievances. No man ever stood in the more critical position that you are in the present moment. King Jaja but refused to do so, and you leave this court a ruined man forever, cut off from your people and your children. Johnston gave two choices to Jaja: surrender immediately and go to Accra in the Gold Coast to face trial, or decline to surrender and be declared an outlaw with a bounty placed on his head for his capture. Johnston gave him 1 hour to decide. Jaja surrendered and Johnston took him on board HMS Goshak and sailed with him to Accra for the trial. Further evidence that Johnston arrested Jaja without authorization is provided by the fact that when the Foreign Office discovered what Johnston had done, they cabled him, report by telegraph precise circumstances under which you thought arrest necessary. It seems that the Foreign Office knew Johnston acted illegally by luring Jaja into custody with a false promise of safe passage and then arresting and deporting him. However, they retrospectively ratified the illegal act by hurriedly enacting the Opobo Political Prisoners Detention Ordinance in October 1887 to enable Jaja to be investigated. What started out as an investigation turned into a trial or a military-style court-martial presided over by Rear Admiral Sir Walter James Hunt Grubb, the Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Navy's Cape of Good Hope and West African stations. Jaja's trial commenced on 29 November 1887 at Fort Christenburg in Accra. Hunt Grubb presented 3 charges against Jaja. 1. Have you at any time barred the trade into the inland districts beyond your own jurisdiction? 2. Have you at any time blocked the highway? 3. Have you since the Protectorate Treaty of 19th December 1884 loyally endeavored to carry out the provisions of that treaty? An African lawyer, Edmund Bannerman, defended Jaja, who was allowed to call witnesses. Calling witnesses was of course virtually impossible because every conceivable person that could testify on his behalf was in Opobo, hundreds of miles and an ocean journey away. The charges against Jaja were strange. The questions that Hunt Grubb presented to Jaja were akin to asking him whether he had done things his treaty allowed him to do. The proceedings were made more bizarre by the reversal of the British legal doctrine of innocence until proven guilty. Rather than having to present evidence to prove the charges, Hunt Grubb asked Jaja to provide evidence that he was innocent of them. Hunt Grubb found Jaja guilty on the second and third counts. The second was proved by the fact that during a trip to Opobo, Johnston's path along the river had been obstructed by beams placed by people he suspected to be Jaja's employees. Hunt Grubb somewhat absurdly claimed that the third was partially proven because Jaja sent a delegation to see the British Secretary of State without Johnston's permission. He exiled Jaja and his son Sunday to the West Indian island of St. Vincent with an annual stipend of £800 a year to be paid to Jaja from his own savings. Jaja was dethroned and exiled for operating a monopoly. Yet strangely, the government allowed a British company to do exactly the same thing with legal authorization, under a royal charter and even compensated the company when its charter was revoked. The treatment meted out to Jaja was a serious matter that left the British government with a lot of explaining to do. Johnston had deported a foreign chief against the express wishes of the Prime Minister. In Parliament, opposition MPs peppered the government with questions about Jaja's fate and demanded details about his medical condition and date of return to his homeland. In May 1888, MP Arthur Pease complained in Parliament that he was sure that Jaja's exile would not have been sanctioned in the case of the ambassadors of any other power and was only sanctioned in this case because Jaja happened to be a black king. Jaja's powerful British and African friends lobbied the British government on his behalf for him to be sent home. While in exile, Jaja succumbed to depression, illness, and homesickness. The terms of his detention forbade him from leaving his residence for more than 4 hours, required a police officer to escort him wherever he went, and ordered that his correspondence be censored. As his health deteriorated, he repeatedly submitted appeals requesting to be returned home so he could die in his homeland rather than in a foreign land. However, British businesses trading in and near Opobo submitted counter-petitions objecting to his return. The government allowed one of Jaja's wives, Patient, to join him in exile and subsequently moved him to Barbados. When his petitions for repatriation continued, they approved his request to return home in 1891, after he signed an undertaking that his return would be conditional on his becoming a private individual, abstaining from fomenting disturbance and conducting himself with loyalty to the Crown and its representatives. As Opobo made preparations to give him a heroic welcome home, sometime in July 1891, he died mysteriously on the way back on the Spanish islands of Tenerife. His body was returned and buried in the courtyard of his compound at Opobo in a ceremony featuring music and cannon fire that could have been a state funeral. A statue of him was also erected in Opobo. The Jaja controversy had wider ramifications and generated native mistrust of Britain. In 1896, an Ishekiri chief, Nana Olomu, from a different region from that of Jaja, rejected an invitation to attend a meeting with the British High Commissioner for the Niger Coast Protectorate, Sir Ralph Moore, and replied, "I fear you go catch me all same Jaja." As we shall see, Jaja's disposition exacerbated the vacuum of political authority in an area where paramount rulers were already scarce. Jaja's constant resort to dialogue and negotiation throughout his conflicts with British businesses and consuls arguably demonstrated that his exile was also to Britain's detriment. By exiling him, British lost the influence and economic and political dexterity of an interlocutor who could have helped them negotiate economic access and political accommodation in the area of West Africa. By deposing a leader with whom they could bargain to some extent, Britain ensured that his encounters with natives of the area would become violent. The Reverend M.J. Eliot, who once met Jaja, subsequently described his fate as a tragic mistake which those who knew Jaja best and felt for him the esteem of which he was worthy have never ceased to regret.